When Jack and I arrived at his brother David's house, it was already quite late. The road had been long and tiring, so I felt a sense of relief when we finally stopped. David's house stood at the edge of a small village, surrounded by trees and bushes. The lights were on, but the place looked quiet and calm. David met us at the door. He looked a bit tired and, to me, slightly tense, but Jack reassured me that his brother was just not used to having visitors often. The house was simple and cozy. Old wooden floors, books on shelves, vintage photographs on the walls. It seemed like no renovations had been done for a while, but everything looked neat and clean. "Glad to see you," David said with a slight smile, inviting us inside. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." I nodded and smiled back. Jack immediately started chatting with his brother, and they began discussing recent news. I decided to look around a bit. The house felt spacious but a little dim. My eyes caught the old furniture and a few unusual pieces of decor, but nothing seemed particularly strange. After dinner, the three of us remained in the living room. Jack, trying to lighten the mood, suggested recalling childhood stories. David initially seemed not very interested, but under his brother's pressure, he began to share memories. They laughed, recounting their pranks in school and how they once sneaked out for a fishing trip without their parents' permission. I watched them, trying to grasp the dynamics of their relationship. Occasionally, David's gaze would linger on me longer than usual, but he would quickly look away whenever I caught his eye. Jack, seemingly oblivious, continued his stories, laughing carefreely, unaware of the hidden tension between us. We sat down for dinner, and I gradually began to relax. David seemed friendly, though a bit reserved. Perhaps it really was just his habit of living alone, I thought. We drank some tea, and I started feeling the exhaustion from the long trip slowly fading away. "David, how do you live here alone? Don't you get bored?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Sometimes, but it suits me," he replied calmly. "You get used to it." There was nothing suspicious in his words, but I felt like he was avoiding long looks and seemed to be deep in his own thoughts. Maybe it was just his personality? I decided not to pay much attention to it and enjoy the quiet and peace. The next day, Jack suggested we spend some time outdoors. We decided to go for a walk in the woods near the house. The forest was thick and old, and we walked along a narrow path that wound between tall trees. Jack walked ahead, telling another story, while David and I walked side by side. At one point, David stopped to show me a rare flower growing right by the ground. "Look, Emily, you don't see these often," he said softly, leaning closer, and I felt his breath touch my cheek. I nodded, trying to stay calm, but inside, something tightened with a strange excitement. The looks he gave me seemed longer and deeper than usual. Meanwhile, Jack kept moving forward, unaware of what was silently unfolding between us. The next morning, wanting to show some hospitality, I decided to help David with the house cleaning. It seemed like a good idea, considering he looked tired and I wanted to do something useful. I started dusting the shelves in the living room, clearing away the dust from books and various souvenirs. While dusting, I noticed an old photo album on one of the shelves. Curious, I opened it and saw numerous photographs of David and Jack in their youth. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed there were hardly any recent photos. It seemed strange, almost as if time had stopped in this house after a certain point. I paused in front of a large painting in the hallway, depicting a seascape. It was unusual. Heavy shadows and dark colors created a sense of anxiety. The whole house felt the same, old, as if it were holding secrets from the past. As I passed by one of the rooms, I noticed an old, heavy-looking wardrobe in the corner. It had dark wooden doors with glass inserts, and for a moment, I thought I saw something unusual inside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to open the wardrobe. What I saw inside made me freeze in place. There was a large doll standing in the wardrobe, almost the size of an adult. It was made of silicone, and its facial features were so lifelike that for a second, I thought it was a real person. The doll was dressed in an elegant outfit, and its skin looked almost real, with a slight sheen like that of a living being. I involuntarily stepped back, trying to grasp what I was seeing. This doll looked expensive and meticulously crafted. I knew such dolls cost a fortune. Why would David have something like this? It was strange. Questions began to swirl in my mind. Why does he have such a doll? What role does it play in his life? Just then, the door suddenly opened, and David walked in. His face was serious and slightly annoyed. He immediately noticed that I had opened the wardrobe, and his expression grew sterner. "What are you doing?" he asked with clear irritation in his voice, quickly shutting the wardrobe doors. "This is my personal space." "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I just thought I could help with the cleaning," I said, feeling my cheeks flush with embarrassment. David sighed heavily and softened his tone slightly. "You shouldn't touch my things without permission," he said. "This wardrobe and its contents are personal to me." I nodded, feeling awkward. Something about his reaction seemed strange to me, but I decided not to push further. My eyes involuntarily returned to the wardrobe, and I couldn't stop thinking about why he had such a doll. Late at night, I woke up again feeling that strange sensation. I lay in bed, but couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept returning to what I had seen during the day. Suddenly, I heard a rustling noise coming from David's room, and the same voice saying my name. "Emily!" This time, the voice was clearer, and I felt a strange excitement rising inside me. I carefully approached the door to his room, feeling a bit foolish. Through a small crack in the door, I tried to see what was happening inside, but I could only make out dark shadows. This heightened my anxiety and curiosity. I felt that something strange was happening in there, but I couldn't yet understand what. Late at night, I woke up feeling thirsty and decided to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet, and only the creaking of the floorboards broke the silence as I carefully walked down the hallway. As I approached the kitchen, I heard something strange. The sounds were coming from David's room at the end of the hallway. I stopped, listening closely. At first, it was something muffled, like a whisper. I took a few steps toward the room, trying to understand what was happening. Then, I clearly heard my name. Someone said it, and the voice sounded like David's. "Emily." I froze in place, my heart beating faster. Why was he saying my name? I didn't understand what was going on, and the first thing that came to mind was that maybe it was just my imagination or a dream. I stood there for a few more seconds, but I didn't hear anything else. The house was quiet again. Maybe I just imagined it, I thought, feeling a bit uneasy, but decided not to dwell on it. I got a glass of water and returned to the bedroom, trying to push those strange sounds out of my mind. The next day, I tried to act as usual. I had breakfast with Jack and David, made small talk, but my thoughts kept returning to that strange night. And to the doll. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen and heard. Why did David have such a doll? Why did I hear my name coming from his room at night? I tried to suppress my unease, but the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to understand what was really happening in this house. Addition. Point 10. Discussion about David's behavior with Jack. Feeling increasingly anxious, I decided to carefully talk to Jack about my suspicions. "Jack," I began, trying to sound calm, Have you noticed anything strange about David's behavior?" He frowned slightly but didn't seem overly concerned. "Oh, Emily," he replied with a smile. "My brother has always been a bit odd, but he has a good heart. He's just used to living alone." I nodded, not wanting to go into detail, but my suspicions only deepened. I felt more and more that something wasn't right in this house. With each passing day, I noticed more and more how David would sometimes disappear into his room for long hours, especially at night. He could vanish after dinner and not come out until morning. Jack seemed completely unaware of this, but I started paying attention. What was he doing in there? One night, when I woke up again to some noise, I heard something that made me pause. I listened closely and could make out his voice. David was speaking my name heavily, with a strange kind of passion. "Emily." His voice sounded like he was calling out to me, or trying to convey something deep and personal. My heart began to race. It was so strange and inexplicable that I could no longer ignore my suspicions. I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, but each time, the sound became more distinct and real. My curiosity and an inexplicable pull toward this behavior began to grow stronger. Something about it was captivating me. The next night, when I heard his voice again, I couldn't resist. I quietly got out of bed and walked down the hallway toward his room. The door was closed, and I approached it, holding my breath to listen. It was quiet inside, but then I heard David say my name again, his voice heavy, almost filled with desire. I knew it was wrong to eavesdrop, but I couldn't resist. Each time, I would return to his door, hoping to hear something new, to understand what he was doing in there. My curiosity became almost an obsession, and every time, I felt an even stranger attraction to this mystery that I couldn't solve. Jack seemed not to notice my nightly walks, and I tried not to show my concern. But inside, the tension was growing. I knew I should stop, but I couldn't. I felt something pulling me closer to whatever was hidden behind that door. One night, as I stood by David's door again, trying to listen in, my nerves were on edge. This time, I was closer to the door, trying to catch every sound. I heard David say my name again. His voice was muffled, but there was a clear hint of passion in it. I tensed up, my heart started pounding harder, and then I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. I quickly turned around and saw Jack. He looked at me with surprise and suspicion. "Emily, what are you doing?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. There was a hint of doubt in his voice. I froze, not knowing what to say, but quickly composed myself. I couldn't tell him the truth, so I decided to focus on the strange sounds. I heard something from David's room," I said, trying not to reveal my true thoughts. "Some strange sounds." Jack frowned, but didn't seem overly concerned. "Emily," he began cautiously, "we're guests in David's house. We shouldn't intrude on his personal space. Maybe he just needs some time alone." "Yes, you're right," I nodded, trying to sound convincing. "Maybe I'm just overreacting." Jack looked at me, a bit surprised, but didn't give it much thought. He waved it off and headed toward the kitchen. I stayed by the door, feeling the curiosity and anxiety still burning inside me. My thoughts kept returning to the strange sounds, the doll, and whatever might be happening in David's room. I knew I should stop, but I couldn't get it all out of my head. Jack might be right, but something inside me wouldn't rest, wouldn't let me forget or find peace. That evening, I stayed alone on the porch of the house, watching the sunset's rays play on the surface of the lake, trying to sort through my feelings. Why was I so drawn to David? What exactly was hidden behind his strange behavior? Thousands of questions swirled in my head, and I couldn't find any answers. I sat there until dark, watching as the day slowly turned into night. Inside, fear and curiosity wrestled with each other, and I realized I had to do something to unravel this mystery. At breakfast the next morning, I began to notice how David looked at me. His glances were long and intent, as if he wanted to memorize every detail of my face. I tried not to look in his direction, but the feeling of his gaze was so obvious that I couldn't ignore it. Jack, as usual, was chatting about something mundane, completely unaware of the hidden tension between us. With each passing day, my thoughts kept returning to the sounds at night, to the way David said my name. I began to realize that every night he was speaking my name and likely doing something with that doll. Slowly, in my mind, I started to form guesses about what exactly he might be doing. The more I thought about it, the stronger the strange excitement grew inside me. This thought, this assumption, seemed to mesmerize me. I felt an inexplicable, painful attraction to David awakening inside me. Mixed with confusion and curiosity, it grew, even though I knew how wrong it all was. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept coming back, each time stronger, urging me to uncover the mystery. I needed to know the truth, to understand what was happening behind his door. This question tormented me more than anything. I felt that David was hiding something important, something I had to understand. I realized that I could no longer wait and just watch from the sidelines. My suspicions and fantasies filled my entire mind, and I decided to take an extreme step, to replace the doll with myself. This thought seemed both insane and inevitable. I had to find out what exactly David was doing and why he behaved so strangely with that doll. One evening, I waited until David left his room. He went outside, and I knew I had a little time. My heart pounded in my chest so loudly that I felt like he could hear me even outside. I carefully crept to his room and quietly went inside. When I entered, I saw that the upper part of the doll was covered with a blanket, while the lower part remained uncovered. My hand trembled as I touched the doll, feeling its silicone skin, which seemed almost real. I quickly took off my dress and put on the one that was on the doll. It fit me as if it had been custom-made. Then I lay down on the bed, trying to position myself in the same way as the doll, and covered myself with the blanket. My heart was racing, and I felt a shiver run through my body from adrenaline and anticipation. What would he do when he entered the room? Would he recognize me? A few minutes later, I heard David's footsteps in the hallway. The door quietly opened, and he entered. I closed my eyes, staying still. He came closer and seemed not to notice the substitution. I heard his breathing become more frequent and heavy. David said my name with such tenderness and passion that it sent chills down my spine. He began to touch me, thinking I was the doll, and kept repeating my name. His movements were slow and gentle, as if he was savoring every moment. He did whatever he wanted, unaware that I was alive. I lay there, trying not to breathe too deeply, feeling my body respond to his touch. His hands explored my skin, and I realized that every one of his fantasies was being played out on me at that moment. I could feel his warmth and passion, and it stirred a strange and inexplicable excitement within me. After several hours had passed, I lay still, doing everything I could to keep my cover. David, continuing his actions, still thought I was the doll. I could feel his hands continuing to caress me and hear him softly repeating my name. He was completely absorbed in his fantasies, unaware that I was alive right next to him. Finally, he stopped. His breathing became more even, and he seemed satisfied. I felt that the moment had come. Holding back a smile, I abruptly pulled the blanket off myself, revealing my true identity. David froze, as if struck by lightning. His eyes widened in shock, and his face turned pale. I saw his gaze slowly come to realization, understanding that it was not the doll in front of him, but me, his brother's wife. He couldn't believe what was happening. His hands were trembling, and he couldn't utter a single word. I felt confident and satisfied. My suspicions had been confirmed, and I felt victorious. My heart was racing, but not from fear, from triumph. I smiled, savoring the moment, seeing his complete bewilderment. "You," he began, but the words wouldn't come out. I got up from the bed and slowly approached David, feeling his confusion grow with every step I took. I leaned in close and whispered in his ear, "I think you enjoyed it much more than with the doll." He was in absolute disarray. His breathing quickened, and his eyes continued to widen at the realization that he had crossed every boundary. I could see him getting lost in his thoughts, trying to figure out what to do next. Triumphantly, I turned and confidently walked out of the room, leaving him in complete bewilderment and shock. I knew everything would change now, and I couldn't help but feel satisfied that I had taken control of the situation. The next day, the atmosphere in the house was tense. I tried to stay calm, but inside, everything was boiling. After yesterday, it was hard to stay in the same room with David without feeling a strange mix of excitement and awkwardness. I knew the conversation was inevitable. In the afternoon, when Jack went to town on some errands, David approached me. His face was serious, his eyes slightly lowered. I felt my heart skip a beat for a moment. "We need to talk," he said quietly, sitting down on the chair across from me. I nodded, trying not to show my anxiety. We sat in silence, and I waited for him to start. Finally, he spoke. "Emily, I've felt attracted to you since you arrived," he confessed, avoiding my gaze. "And when I realized you had replaced the doll with yourself, I started to suspect it might not be the doll, but I decided to play along, pretend. What if it really was you?" I noticed how his face grew even more tense as he continued. "I wasn't entirely sure, but I decided to see how it would unfold. And then I thought I could pretend to be surprised, and in a way, I was." Listening to him, I felt a wave of mixed emotions rise inside me: anger, embarrassment, relief. But despite everything, I sensed that his words were honest. "I didn't understand what was happening to me either," I finally replied, deciding to share my thoughts. "I was confused, not sure how to feel about it. But every time I heard my name, I felt something I couldn't ignore." David looked up at me, and I saw pain and desire in his eyes at the same time. "We both should have known we were playing with fire," I continued, "but now it's gone too far." He nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "No one should ever know about this," David said firmly. "It stays between us." I agreed. We both understood it was the only way out. The tension hung in the air, but we both knew we had to keep this secret. It was our silent agreement, and now each of us was bound to it. After that conversation, everything changed between David and me. We began to act more cautiously so that Jack wouldn't notice anything unusual. I felt the tension between David and me grow each day. Our glances lingered longer on each other, and we sought touches, even if accidental. When Jack was around, we kept our distance, trying to appear as indifferent to each other as possible. But as soon as he left the room, everything changed. I felt an invisible thread growing stronger between us, binding us closer. Secret glances, fleeting touches under the table, all this made the situation even more intense. I realized that things were getting out of control. One evening, after Jack had fallen asleep, David and I were left alone in the kitchen. He gave me a long look, his eyes glimmering as if trying to peer into the depths of my soul. I felt a shiver run through my body, and unable to contain my feelings, I whispered, "We'll be leaving soon with Jack. Maybe we could repeat that game." I couldn't believe I had said those words. My voice trembled, and my heart was pounding so hard I feared he could hear it. David took a step closer, his face serious, but I could see the desire in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, trying not to show his emotions. I didn't know what to answer. Conflicting feelings overwhelmed me, but the desire to see how far we could go was stronger. "I'm sure," I finally said, feeling my words echo in my head. He nodded, and at that moment, I knew we had gone too far. But it was already impossible to stop. We were both captivated by this game, by the secret bond that was becoming more real and dangerous. David and I agreed to play our game again on the day before we were supposed to leave, while Jack had gone to visit friends nearby. It seemed like the perfect moment. We had enough time to do everything we wanted without fear of being caught. Once again, I put on the doll's dress and lay down on the bed, covering myself with a blanket. Just like before. David entered the room and began his part, his voice filled with passion, and I tried to immerse myself fully in the game, shutting out everything else. We were so absorbed in what was happening that we didn't hear the car pulling up or the sound of the front door opening. Suddenly, the door to the room flew open, and Jack walked in. We were so engrossed that we didn't notice his presence until the very last moment. I froze, my heart pounding wildly. Jack stood in the doorway, his face a mix of confusion and rage. He slowly stepped closer, looking at us, and with a sharp movement, yanked the blanket off me. When he saw me, his face instantly twisted with anger. "What is going on here?" he shouted, his voice trembling with fury. "What the hell are you doing?" I couldn't utter a word. David looked just as stunned. We hadn't expected Jack to return so soon, and were caught in the most unexpected moment. Consumed with anger, Jack lunged at David. They began to fight, and I, paralyzed, couldn't move. My mind was clouded with shock and fear. I heard the sounds of their struggle outside the door, but I couldn't force myself to move. Everything felt unreal, as if I were frozen by this unexpected situation. After a while, the noise subsided. I heard Jack loudly slam the door and head for the exit. He didn't come into my room or try to find out anything more. Before leaving, he only said, "It's over between us." I sat on the bed, unable to move, barely holding back tears. Everything collapsed in an instant. Inside, I felt nothing but empty Jack left, slamming the door so hard that the house seemed to shudder. I sat in my room, still unable to move. My thoughts were in complete chaos, and I didn't know what to do next. On one hand, I felt unbearable guilt, realizing I had destroyed my marriage. On the other hand, the remnants of my passion for David still burned inside me, despite everything that had happened. The room was filled with silence, broken only by my heavy breaths. I felt an emptiness so deep that it seemed to swallow me whole. All I knew was that my life would never be the same again. After a while, I heard the door creak softly, and David entered the room. His face was pale, his eyes downcast. He was clearly distressed. "Emily," he said, his voice quiet and filled with pain. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." I looked at him, feeling my emotions warring within me. I wanted to blame him, blame myself, blame the whole world, but the words wouldn't come. "We've ruined everything," I finally said, my voice trembling. "We put everything that mattered at risk." David sat down across from me, his eyes full of guilt and regret. "I understand," he said quietly. "I realize I've lost my brother because of what I did. I've jeopardized your life, your future, and mine too. I don't know how to fix this." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I could no longer hold myself together. Inside, there was emptiness and, at the same time, bitterness. The realization that we had crossed a line we should never have crossed. We both knew it was wrong, I replied, but we couldn't stop. Now it's all over. He nodded, and I saw his shoulders slump under the weight of guilt. We both knew there was no way back. Jack was gone, and with him my old life was gone too. I knew I couldn't stay in this house. Everything that had happened between us was a mistake that changed my life forever. I understood that my relationship with David couldn't continue. It was too destructive, too painful. I needed to move on. The next morning, I packed my things. My hands trembled as I folded clothes and personal items into my bag. Every step felt heavy, but I knew it was necessary. David stood by the door, watching me. Regret and something else I couldn't decipher were in his eyes. "Emily," he said quietly when I finished, "I want you to know that I do have feelings for you, but I also understand that we need to let each other go. For your future, for your peace." I looked at him, feeling tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back. His words were honest, and I knew he was right. We both understood that continuing like this wasn't possible. "I feel something for you, too," I replied softly. "But these feelings are too destructive for both of us. I don't know what the future holds, but I know we need to move forward." We stood in silence, each lost in our thoughts. I saw the pain in his eyes, and at the same time, an understanding. Our encounter had changed us both, but we knew we couldn't be together. "Take care of yourself," he said, lightly touching my hand. "And if you ever need help, you know where to find me." I nodded, feeling his touch send the last echo of the feelings that had been between us. But I knew this was goodbye. I hugged him, knowing it was our last moment together. "Goodbye, David," I whispered, turning to leave. He didn't try to stop me, and with each step, I felt my feet grow lighter. I walked out the door, knowing I was beginning a new chapter of my life, without him, but with an important lesson that would stay with me forever.